Thank you. Okay, here we are. Well, welcome to Sacred Authenticity. I'm Steph Furo. I'm here with Stephanie Zito. I'm so excited to introduce her in a moment, but this show is still new, so I'm going to tell you what we're doing here. We're exploring sacred authenticity and really how to connect with and own who you are and living your life. It's about dropping the tension of trying to be everything to everybody else first, which I know many of us have had the pattern of doing. And, it's like all the roles you have to play from day to day and all the things you have to do, we can get really caught up in performing and lose ourselves in that process. Um, so so we're here to talk about how do you do this? How do you stay connected and how do you really own that when it maybe goes against some patterns that you've had and maybe feels weird for you and maybe feels weird or uncomfortable for those around you as well. So thank you for being here, Stephanie. We have Stephanie Zito, an intuitive soul purpose coach, and I think we're going to have a great conversation around this. So thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me. I'm so glad to be here. This is just as you were talking, one of my just most passionate topics is why I do what I do. So I'm super glad to have this conversation with you too, Steph.
Awesome. Well, I'd love to start out by hearing a little bit more about your journey. Like, have you always had a strong sense of who you are, or has it been more of a discovery process over time? And tell us what that journey has been
Yeah.
like.
Well, it's interesting because I think some people, and this has a lot to do with our human design and kind of how we are designed. And so when we just allow ourselves to be how we are, we don't have to fight it. Like some people are born and they know, like, I'm going to be a lawyer, I'm going to be a doctor, I'm going to do this. Like they just know. And for me, it's been a little different. It's really been sort of themes, but this meandering path. I've always been in just a position of helping people to sort of feel empowered, find the freedom in being themselves. You know, I've worked in a lot of wilderness settings and corporate team building. I've worked with at-risk kids in the wilderness, and it's always about coming true to you and your center. So I can't say that at the age of 17 I knew I was going to be an intuitive, much less a soul purpose coach. But I think these themes have always been there. Like hearing what someone wants to do with their life always has lit me up. So it sort of like was a cosmic clue towards where I was headed. And I really feel right now, if any time in my life I've really landed, because there were times, and I feel like I'm going to say this because it might resonate with some listeners, where I took my gifts, but I utilized them, but I was sort of hiding them within another setting. So within a
Mm,
teaching setting or even teaching yoga, I would say to myself, well, I'm doing my thing, but it was like safer. It wasn't like fully completely expressed. Like right now it feels like it's full on out there, but it was always like, I'm not quite there. I had this like nudge or this nag to like, I just knew it wasn't quite fully fitting the pieces together because it was maybe easier or more easy for people to understand or whatever the story was.
yeah. So I'm curious because I feel like I've taken a meandering path as well. And at times it has really discouraged me, like looking at where you are and knowing that it's unsatisfying, or looking at where you've been and knowing that like this is not where I'm going to stay. It can feel like, man, I've just wasted all this time, or I have just wasted all these years. Um, but then there's always hindsight, right? So I'm curious, in hindsight, like do you kind of see how there was this like weaving together of everything every like stop around your path, or how did that play
Yeah,
out
and
for
I
you?
can't say if I were to tell the whole story, would it even sound linear? Probably not, but that's okay because to me, it's interesting. I don't regret anything that I've done. You know, fortunately, there was never even a time where I got so off course that it was like I mean, there were some course corrects, but I've never been even though I worked corporate team building, I've never been a suit and jacket kind of person, 9 to 5. It's just never been. So I've actually never done that. But I feel like when I look at what I have done, I was in the Peace Corps, I was a teacher trainer. These little things, they gave me something along the way that helped me. Now that I'm where I'm at, I kind of needed to develop into what I currently do. Like I almost needed those pieces, those stepping stones to understand how I do what I do, or the people that I met and worked with. It all became kind of part of the story to now work with individuals and groups with intuition and with their big vision and helping them bring it to life. So if that kind of makes sense. But fortunately, definitely no regrets. If anything, when I did really get off course, like with a relationship or with a certain move, I'm really grateful for at that time refinding and leaning into my intuition to help guide me back on path. To me, it's like, well, where's my center? The more I know my center, it's going to shift and change. And who knows, 10 years from now, it might look completely different than it does today. And that's great. I can't even imagine what that's going to look like. So,
Yeah, right.
yeah.
So the moment when you said you were kind of, it felt like you were maybe hiding within some of the things you were doing, and it became clear to you that there was something more, something like even more aligned. I imagine that took some courage. What was that moment like for you when you saw, when you could see it, like what the shift would be, and we're kind of faced with like, am I going to go for this, or am I going to pretend that I didn't just hear that?
Well, sometimes the universe, and we don't have to do it this way, but sometimes we manifest through the universe through like real emotional events or things that are really going to push us. And when my life was too comfortable, I didn't have enough of an incentive for survival, for money to make the shift. So basically what happened was I was working my outdoor stuff. I met my husband, we got married, and we had our first child, and he was so wonderful. He really wanted me just to find my thing. And it's interesting because to him, I think finding my thing was like research. And for me, it has to be in action. So, I was teaching yoga. I was also with our daughter. But I knew at that point I wanted to start coaching. I knew. And yet I was afraid because I had all these pieces. Well, I utilize breath work, I utilize somatics or Kundalini, or there is this intuitive piece, and I'm talking about the chakras, and what the heck even is this? I couldn't quite grasp what to call it, and it felt so outside the box. My fears, or my little gremlin was telling me like people wouldn't understand. I had my stories. So what it took was my husband was laid off from his job. And so we were thrown into a place where he took a leap to start freelancing on his own. And I just knew in that moment, I was like, I'm either going to do this. It's like, or I'm not. Like, what am I going to do? I could go get a corporate job, something that I don't really want, or I could just do what I know is aligned. And it's like when you really say yes, even when you're afraid, but you're like, this is the path. That's when I feel like our guides are able to bring us the synchronicities and the people and opportunities to support us. That's exactly what happened. And again, it's like random things that I almost said no to. I almost was like, I'm not going to do that, or I felt guilty about doing it. But I wound up meeting a coach who helped me understand how to market myself, and had a wonderful relationship working with that coach, really helped me get started. And even there, I took who I am and how I do things, and I made it more manageable or more normal. And I called myself a speaker's coach. What was interesting is that everyone who came to me, we actually never got to the speaking. We never got to coming up with like their story and that coaching. It was all about the backdrop stuff. It was all about the personal transformation or making a big shift in their life and getting aligned. So I was like, okay, there's clearly a theme here. And so another door got to open, and that's where I took an intuitive training, and that's become really just a backdrop of of what I do when I'm working with my clients. So really it was a lot of saying yes. And that coach, he had me do some things that really felt uncomfortable, just reaching out, in terms of client attraction. But I knew, like, what am I mean, I had to work through those fears, and in doing that, that was like a huge piece of personal transformation for me too. If you're going to be a coach, you're probably going to go through your own personal transformation as well.
Uh, oh gosh, I can I can feel all of that for
Yeah.
sure. Um, okay, so you said that, you got to know where your core is and like, okay, where's my center? Coming back to center really practically on any random Tuesday. What does that look like? How do you do that when like life can get so busy? How do you stay connected on that deeper level with yourself?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you, it is what, 9 o'clock right now? I've been up since 5 and I've already had 2 things before this. And so it's one of those days, I've got kids, they got to have their lunches packed. We need to know about pickup. Like there's a lot of moving parts, right? And so one of the practices that I use, I call it vision casting, and I use it for my big vision, and I use it for the everyday. And it's been one of the biggest shifts that's helped me to be in my center. Because the way it looks is, I could start off the morning and I could already feel like it's early, and I mean, my brain could be in so many places, right? And so much to coordinate. So when I vision cast, I look at what's happening for that day, and I look at, well, how do I want to feel? How do I want to be in that moment? When I'm with these retreat clients, I want to be with them, not thinking about how I'm going to get to my next thing. Then, because they can feel that. They can feel that energy if I'm not right there, if I'm worried or I'm thinking about what's next or I'm feeling rushed. And they're not there for that. So when we vision cast, like for instance, before this, I led some people on a hike. So I could vision cast. I'm so grateful to be on this hike with these individuals. I enjoy the ions in my body from the ocean. We take our time together. We laugh. It's like vision casting like the night before. Well, how do I want that to look? How is that going to go?
Mm.
And it literally programs this beautiful supercomputer we have towards that which we desire. And I've seen the biggest shifts, of everything and anything I've done, like on the day to day, by just doing that simple practice.
Wow, and that is so powerful. So you just kind of play out your day and you see yourself living each of the things and how do I want to be? How do I want to experience this?
Yeah, and it can be like you've got your to-do list. So you might look at your to-do list on your phone, and well, eventually I've got a planner in the works, so you can have the vision casting planner. But until then, you just take your notebook or you take your planner and you write sentences for these tasks. So it could be literally making your kids lunches. It could be literally your drive to where you're headed, because we can get really distracted. How do I want to be on my drive? And then for those activities, you write, how do you want it to be? How do you want to feel? And I've seen my clients, I have a female CEO client. She runs her own business, and going into like a big business deal, and she'll screenshot for me her vision casting. So that could be a lot more detailed. And she's, as a woman in her field, it's a very male dominated field, she's talked about that, and so I think for her to do that, it sets her up for success, because we can have our self-doubt, we can have our worries, and yet when we set ourselves up for what we desire, it's like a super attractor. It's like we literally attract that in. Like it's like you're already there. I've noticed it even with hydrating my body. Once I started doing this, I started to catch things that were out of alignment, and I would look at my day and
Mm.
say, have I even had any water today? So it would help me to even catch, how am I taking care of myself? Have I had time for self-care? And the nice thing is that we have this hormone in our body which can help us to feel accomplished. And that hormone is dopamine. And so when we get a like on Facebook, we get a dopamine hit. And that's why we get addicted to looking for those. Even an email coming in is like a reward system, like, oh, I got something. But we can do that for ourselves through this process, because at the end of the day, you just check in. What did I do it? Was I present during my yoga class? Did I even go to yoga? Did I drink my water? Was I mindful while I was eating my lunch? And it's like a reward system, like, oh, I can check that off. I did that. Like every day we've accomplished. And if you didn't, you can just look at it like that's information for me to understand what got in my way. Was it a fear? Was it procrastination? Was it an excuse? What was it? And then I can make decisions for the next day based on what I really want.
That is really powerful. A couple of things occurred to me. One, it's like, I was just reading about how we used to think the brain controlled the mind, but it's the mind that controls the brain. And you are describing beautifully how to use the tool, like prime the tool, program the tool. I'm going to tell this tool how I want it to function for me. And then you have that working with you. But, even as you describe packing your kids' lunches, that is the kind of thing that so many of us would just dismiss in our minds as like, oh, that's just a little task or chore I have to do. Oh, that's easy. I can just get through that. But, there's the whole, like, how you do anything is how you do everything. And that's life. Like, that's something you get to do pretty much every day. And so I just really appreciate how beautifully you've kind of described connecting with, really valuing each part of your day and your experience, because it all matters, right?
Right. Yeah. Thank you for recognizing that. And just as we talk about with manifesting, gratitude is a beautiful high vibration emotion that helps us to cultivate even more of that which we desire. So just like the school lunches, if I'm packing and I'm just like busy and thinking about other stuff and mindless, I could do that. And I also could infuse that moment with gratitude that I get to do this for these beautiful people in my life for so many years. and then I won't be doing that anymore. I can infuse even, everything's got vibration. Like what if I'm infusing that with that lunch and then they get to open that and
and they feel it. They'll feel it.
Right. And I'm not, trust me, I mean, not every day probably feels like that, but when I do it, I really do notice even the small tasks, right? Just like you said, how we do something is how we do everything. Or
Yeah.
however you said it.
So I feel like this is one of those things that you can talk about it and everyone can agree, like, oh yeah, this is good. This is all good stuff. But it can be difficult in practice, especially when, maybe you talked about, being able to see what's out of alignment. Maybe you don't like what you see. Maybe you think it should be in alignment, even if it doesn't feel like it is. Or I think the other place this gets really tricky is when other people have come to expect us to be a certain way. And then, something changes for you and it affects those around you, and they may or may not be gracious or receptive to you, doing what you need to do. So I'm curious what advice you would what you would give for people who are feeling that kind of tension. Like,
yeah, and I think there's times when we're in the in between. So it's possible that be like before I met my husband, for instance, I was in a relationship that I ended, and so there was the in between of making the decision to leave the relationship, and it was so hard. And so I was in the in between. I was living in that space, and yet I was feeling out of alignment, and it was showing up in not sleeping well at night and crying a lot. And yet I wanted to make it work. So some of the things that can really help, one is we can call it like our conditions of satisfaction, like understanding, well, what are my conditions of satisfaction? Are my conditions of satisfaction that I'm treated a certain way, that I feel valued in a certain way in any relationship, and then also allowing space. Like if I let go of this friendship, if I let go of this relationship, what am I allowing to flood in? And I know that from experience, because at the moment, what kept me stuck was the feeling that I wasn't going to have anything. There was like nothing good was going to exist after that, which seems crazy, but these beliefs.
So normal. Yeah.
Yeah. The fear, it's like the fear. And yet it's like, just, I don't think we realize sometimes how much beauty is available to us when we step in, when we allow ourselves to go into that unknown. So if you're in the in between, what I sort of suggest is find those conditions of satisfaction. Am I satisfied with how I'm taking care of my body? Do I want to, make time for more exercise? And if I do that, am I going to have to lean on my partner, my husband, someone to help me, right? And if I do that, I'm going to have to shift that relationship. They're going to have to see my truth, and they could then either accept that, or they could throw it to the side or deny that it's important, or they could argue it. I cannot control how they react. All I can control is when I declare what it is that I need and what I stand for. And I can do that in a compassionate way. And so I think what we do when we do that is we sort of untangle, recognize those feelings that can come up. Like, let's say that I want to do yoga 3 days a week, and now it's going to impact, my husband being home with the kids. And I'm like, I need this for my mental health. It's what's happening. I cannot control how he's going to react. What I can do is stand for myself and recognize, like, listen to my body. Am I feeling guilty about this? Is he putting that guilt on me, or am I just feeling that because of other stuff from my past, because of how I was raised, or because of whatever society? Am I feeling I'm doing something? We have to kind of look at, like, those emotions that come up and understand, as we see them, is this my truth? Am I actually being selfish, or is that just sort of an emotion or a feeling I'm putting on this situation? Whereas this can be really normal for a lot of people. So it's sort of like acknowledging people need that adjustment time, and also recognizing some of these relationships, if someone isn't going to match up to our standards and how we want to be treated, then that's okay. I mean, it might feel lonely for a bit, but it allows in that person. Like, when we stand for ourselves and rise up, we allow ourselves to energetically match with those people too, and we allow other people to rise up too.
Is that something that has come naturally to you, or is that something you have learned over time, how to stand up for yourself and, like,
Yeah.
powerfully stand in your truth?
No, I mean, I definitely, sort of some tools that developed when I was younger were people pleasing tools. So I definitely, my center, which is also human design, so it kind of went hand in hand, was in the external. How did people see me? How was I acting in a way that I would be liked? Was I going to do something, not all the time, but I can definitely relate that some of these things in the past would have definitely felt more difficult. And I definitely made choices that weren't for me. They were probably external to myself. And so I think what started to happen, like a big shift, was when I sort of really knew that my work was intuitive work. And I was using words like psychic, medium. I was using those words on the internet. And so people who are very close to me could see that. And some of those people were not happy with that. And so I started to think to myself, well, should I block those people? Should I just have it so they can't see it? That's like a lot of work. That's a lot of
Right.
like one or two people.
Managing everybody's perception.
So I'm like, okay, that's not going to happen. So I wound up having that conversation, sort of that declaration, and not in a way that was defensive, not in a way that was feeling guilty or trying to make excuses. It was just like, from love, this is who I am. This is who I know I be. And if those people needed to make choices to not have me in their life because of that, like, I knew I couldn't control that. And so it was more important for me just to feel the freedom of being me than it was to please other people. And that felt like a really big turning point.
That's a huge turning point, isn't it? Like,
yeah.
I matter too, and I am not going to walk away from myself
And
right
I know
now.
I'm doing good work. And I feel like doing that helped me to also release, just from having, we can get the sister wound, or from having been bullied when I was in 7th grade with girls, we can have this sister wound. And, for me, it turned into wanting to be really liked by other women. And so it helped me to also release that, need. And when I released that, I feel like this whole soul tribe of friends were able to see me, and they were like, wait a minute, I'm into that too. And it opened up this whole, like, rich just fabric of friendships that I wouldn't have had if I had just been hiding and not fully in my soul's expression.
Yeah. Gosh, that is so beautiful. And I want to thank you for sharing. I mean, sharing a lot of your experiences or story with us. And I'll have to say your sweatshirt is perfect, by the way. I've been admiring that.
Thank you. I love this brand.
Where can I get one?
Yeah, I'll tell you. It's this company. It's called Breathe in Detroit,
Oh,
and
cool.
I love supporting them. I mean, clearly they're a Detroit-based business. I've got their other shirt under here. It's just great messages. So I've got
Oh,
like a
perfect.
wrap that has love written on the inside. It's great stuff.
Oh yeah, that'd feel good to wear, I bet.
Yeah,
A
it
little
does.
extra
It
boost. Well, I love to help people make connections, and I know some people watching have resonated with different things you've said, and I really encourage whoever is watching and feels this like pull or just like a little nudge, like, ooh, that's interesting, or I want to check that out. Do it. It's really powerful to follow those little even whispers. So Stephanie, how can people find you or connect with you?
Yeah, you can just come friend me right here on Facebook, Steph Zito. And I'm on an app for meditation called Insight Timer. So I do a lot of live sessions there. It's a really wonderful place to connect with soul-minded people. So you can find me, Stephanie Zito, at that app, and Insight Timer too. And I do have a free gift for the people who are watching or listening also.
Hey.
Yeah. So we're talking about really tapping into your intuition. I've got this intuition guide, which helps walk you through 3 different steps to really tap into your inner knowing. And you'll know, it's interesting. People are like, even if you don't like the answer, you'll know. So it's just a bit.ly link, bit.ly, the intuition guide. And I'm sure we can just put it in the notes here.
Yeah, I'll make sure we get that in the comments. Beautiful. Well, thank you, Stephanie, and we'll be here again next week for another episode of Sacred Authenticity. Have a beautiful day, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.